So joining us right now, we are going to talk to the authors of a new book that's coming out today, I believe. It's called The Girls Are Gone, Michael Brodkorb and Allison Mann. So thank you for both for joining me here this morning.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about The Girls Are Gone. What's the story? It's a local true story, right?
Correct. The Girls Are Gone is a story of two kids from Lakeville who disappeared for 944 days during a custody dispute involving their parents. In fact, there's a local connection to the St. Cloud area, which we can talk about in a moment here. But the story involves Samantha and Gianna Rucki, two teenagers that disappeared during a custody dispute on April 19, 2013. They were missing for 944 days in the state of Minnesota, and they were found. What was later learned, and we discussed at length in the book, is that their mother had taken them during a custody dispute. Their mother, Sandra Rucki, had abducted the children on April 19, 2013 from their home in Lakeville, Minnesota, and then hid them at a ranch out in northwestern Minnesota. And a woman from the St. Cloud area, by the name of Dee Everbold, who lives in St. Cloud currently today, was charged for her role in the disappearance of the Rucki girls, charged and convicted of 6 felonies for her role. So it is an important story that discusses both, first of all, in a state that we have where child abductions and are so unfortunately known because of the story of Jacob Letterling. This is a story where the children were found alive. They've been reunited with their father. They're doing great. But there is a whole element here about parental abductions and the role that parents sometimes play in hiding children from parents in custody disputes. And we explore that a lot in the book.
So talk a little bit, I was going through the news release here before our call, and talk a little bit about the fact that Samantha and Gianna, they actually had 3 other siblings, 3 younger kids, right, which were not taken or abducted. So talk a little bit about why that was. Why did the mom take the 2 older girls but leave the other 3 behind?
You know, I think it was opportunity. When the transition was made of the children, they were going to make the transition in 2 groups. And so the 2 oldest girls were transferred from their maternal aunt's house to back to their father's house where their paternal aunt was living. And so those 2 oldest girls went first. And it was the night of April 19th, 2013, and they left the home that night. The 2 youngest children were still at their maternal aunt's house, so they did not leave the house.
And so for the 944 days that they had been missing, for the most part, the mom, Sandra, was not with them. Is that accurate? She did not stay with them?
Correct. No, she dropped them off at a ranch in northwestern Minnesota, in Herman, Minnesota. The kids were dropped off by Sandra Rucki and Dee Everbold, the woman from St. Cloud. They were dropped off at a ranch in northwestern Minnesota, and they lived at the ranch, held at the ranch per se, for those entire 944 days. They did not go to school. They were not provided with health care. They were not taken to the doctor. It was just a horrible, horrible treatment of these kids. And the owners of the ranch where the kids were at, they pleaded guilty for their role in the disappearance of these 2 kids. So there were 4 adults charged, and all 4 were either convicted or pled guilty for their role in the disappearance of these kids.
So where was the mom, Sandra, during this whole period? Where was she? What was she doing?
Well, we discussed that in the book at length. Sandra was a flight attendant. Sandra resumed her responsibilities flying. She also traveled the world, went on vacations, did other stuff. At the exact same time that she was telling the court that she didn't have any money, she didn't have any resources, the mom, Sandra, was traveling the world, going on vacations, doing other things, just living her lifestyle. She was also actively involved with Michelle McDonald, who is a candidate currently for the Minnesota Supreme Court. Michelle was Sandra Rucki's attorney during this time. During the entire 944 days the girls were gone, Michelle McDonald was Sandra Rucki's attorney. Sandra appeared at campaign events for Michelle McDonald and talked about the plight of her missing kids, that she didn't know where they were, when in fact she was actively involved in their disappearance and hiding them from their father.
Yeah, I would assume she had to have been the prime suspect, right, for taking the girls?
She was, yes. And she was, and the problem was this crowd of people that did a great job of obfuscating the facts of this case. People like Dee Dee Evervold, people like Michelle McDonald. There was a whole underground network of people that were involved in obfuscating the facts, complicating the search, complicating the family court matter. And for people watching, people listening to this, and people who will read the book, you'll be left with a kind of a dumbfounded kind of response of how could adults with good jobs, good education, good background participate in this type of cover-up, this level of a crime? It's just astounding to think about, particularly in a state like Minnesota.
So did Sandra have contact regularly with her other 3 children during this whole period, or did she kind of like abandon them as well?
She abandoned all of her children. She didn't have contact with any of them during the time period.
Wow. So how the other players in this, Dee Dee here from St. Cloud, the couple from Herman, how did they connect with her? Did they have a previous relationship with the mom, Sandra, or how'd they all get to know each other?
Well, Dee Dee Evervold was connected to the mom through this kind of family court corruption group of people that came together and all believe that the family courts are corrupt, and it's a lot of people who have been involved in the family court system. That's how they met. The Dollins from Herman were connected with Dee Dee Evervold through Gina Dollin's previous job as a pharmaceutical sales rep. She worked with Dee Dee.
Talk a little bit then now about how we found where the girls were. Talk a little bit about that. Refresh our memory about how they were discovered.
Well, the girls, in April of 2015, there was a Star Tribune story. I was writing for the Star Tribune at the time, but a reporter for the Star Tribune had spoken with Dale Nathan, who a lawyer who had been with Sandra on the night that she was in a car driven with Sandra on the night she picked up her daughters and abducted them. He made comments to the media, and over the course of 2015, from April until October of 2015, there was extensive work being done. The investigation was really jump-started. In the book, we discuss at length the search, the efforts that were taken by the Lakeville Police Department. There was also a very helpful role with the media. I played a small role in that, and so did others, in kind of driving interest, public awareness of this story. And the girls were eventually found on November 18th in a search led by the Lakeville Police Department at the ranch in Herman, Minnesota. They were reunited with their father very shortly thereafter. And so it was a long process. 944 days these kids were gone. Statistically, the odds are not in favor that these kids are going to be found. If they're found, they might not have been found alive. And the fact they were found alive and have been reunited with their father, it's an amazing story. And the danger and the lesson that we want people to understand from this is some of the people that were involved in this are still out there. People like Dee Dee Evervold are out there talking about this case continually and feel that they were wrongly prosecuted. And there's just a very scary element of people that were involved in this crime. And it involves children. It involves our most vulnerable in society, or the ones that we care for the most, children. And to think that there's adults out there living that want this to happen again, it's pretty scary. It's pretty unnerving.
So I'm assuming you both talked to the girls, Samantha and Gianna. What did they tell you? What was their life like for those 944 days while they were on this farm?
It was not a good situation. I mean, these kids were dropped off at a ranch by their mother and a person that they had just met with strangers. They didn't go to school. They didn't have health care. And they were isolated in a part of northwestern Minnesota it's a very remote area. Alice and I did some research up in that area for the book. It's a remote area. It's a remote area of the state, and geography was worked against them. These kids could not have just walked out on the street and flagged down a vehicle. They were in a remote, desolate part of the state of Minnesota. It was a hard life. They did farming. They picked rocks. They did field work. While these kids should have been in school, hanging out with their friends, going to football games, going to sporting events, going to movies, these kids were picking rocks in the field, sometimes for little or no pay, and just a grueling farm lifestyle and so the Dollins, Doug and Gina, unfortunately benefited from, in essence, having child labor working on their ranch for a couple of years. And so it was just a terrible lifestyle for these girls. But they're back. They're doing better. They're with their family. They're with their friends, and they moved on. And it's an important story to tell to make sure this doesn't ever happen again to any kid in America, but particularly in Minnesota.
So if Sandra Gazzini Rucki wanted to abandon her 5 children anyway, why take the 2 girls? Why abduct them? What was her motivation?
I think her motivation was spite. I think she was upset at her ex-husband. Unfortunately, in these hotly contested divorce cases, sometimes children become the pawn between the parents, and this was a way in which Sandra could enact some pain towards her ex-husband, and children get used sometimes. Unfortunately, it's a narrative that plays out all too often in court. What makes this case so extreme is the abduction of the kids. It's the leaving of the kids at a ranch and the lifestyle that the kids endured then for 944 days. Sandra, this is a incredibly tragic divorce case. It is an incredibly tragic criminal case, but her motivation was clearly to just out of spite and frustration towards her ex-husband. There's no logical reason why someone would do the things that she did.
So the 4 adults that were involved in this abduction, where are they all today? You mentioned Dee Dee is not in prison. She's here in St. Cloud. Why is she not in prison?
She was convicted on 6 felony counts and served time in jail, and she is out. She's on probation now. She has a number of different legal battles going on currently. The Rucki family took out a harassment restraining order against her based on some blogging that she was doing. She was continuing to just kind of torment the family with putting up their pictures and making accusations about David Rucki. She had at one point put a map to their house up on her blog, and it got to the point where it was just too much for the family. So they asked the court for a harassment restraining order, which was granted. Eventually, it took about a year of battling that, and she has recently filed an appeal on that case. She is also facing probation violation charges because of the blogging that she was doing about the Rucki family. So she's waiting for a hearing on that as well. Doug and Gina Dolan served time. They've served approximately 20 days in jail. They were on work release, and their time is done. Their probation, I'm not exactly sure when it ends, but they are currently, I think, still on probation. And Sandra Gazzini Rucki just finished her time. She decided to execute her sentence, so she served all of the jail time, which was about 260 days. She ended up serving all of her jail time and was on a supervised release, and that ended in the end of September. So she is free.
And one of the much needed reforms that needs to come out of this case is related to the sentence that it was occurred. I mean, clearly, based on the dates and information that Allison just articulated, that's the legal. I think would meet in the court of public opinion, that would meet the definition of slap on the wrist related to the penalties that were assigned to the criminals involved in this case. And so hopefully one of the things that comes out of this book is some much-needed reforms related to the criminal justice system and treating parental abductions and familiar abductions the same way that we treat stranger abductions. I mean, it's just as traumatizing, if not more, for families to know that a relative is involved in the kidnapping and the disappearance and the abduction of children. And so hopefully one of the net positives of discussing this story and being on your show today and doing this interview is that hopefully some stakeholders look at some of the penalties related to this crime and do what they can to increase them to dissuade people from engaging in this type of criminal activity.
Yeah, it's shocking to me that all 4 of the adults involved got far, far shorter sentences than the length of the time that the girls had to spend on this ranch up in western Minnesota. Like, their length that they were kind of imprisoned on this farm was way longer than what the adults ended up getting.
You're absolutely right. It's very true. And as Michael was saying, there needs to be some reform around this issue.
Well, I am out of time, but the book is called The Girls Are Gone. It's on store shelves and available online starting today, right?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, very good. Well, thank you both for talking to me. The authors are Michael Brodkorb and Allison Mann. The Girls Are Gone. Get it today and read the whole story. Thank you so much for joining me, both you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank
you
so
much.